Hello and welcome. This is Mama Jess, everything you wish your mother told you. So I've been seeing some podcasters holding mugs and kind of like kick back on their couch and like crossing their legs, and they just look really kind of cool and relaxed. So I'm going to do that this morning because I have a sore throat and I'm going to take some hot lemon water. Maybe this is like how a mom would talk with you with her cup of coffee or whatever, like, son, daughter, good morning, we're going to talk about something. Rites of Passage. There are a lot of things that will probably destroy this country, but one of the biggest will be the coddling of irresponsible people. And I was raised in it in Santa Cruz, where we had this homeless problem, and we really had a problem of that democratic socialist mindset that had some kind of sympathy for what they called homeless people, but I just saw them as mostly angry white men who wanted to get high. That's my experience. And I saw a lot of it. Lots of needles on the beach. I remember seeing the red sharps container in the bathrooms where we ran our junior lifeguard program. So we had all of our students having to go in to the same bathroom as where, these drug addicts, because I'm going to call them drug addicts. People, well, we'll call them homeless. Yeah, they are homeless probably because they're suffering the consequences of being a drug addict and a drunk. And, but it was grievous that our junior guard kids had to go in there and share the same bathroom with people like this. And I watched the entire cycle where they could go get meals, they could take a shower where we would be showering as lifeguards and junior lifeguards. They had access to the bathroom. They were given fresh needles. They were given sharps containers to dispose of them. And when they happened to forget to dispose of them properly, they would be all over the beach, where we then had to implement policy to wear shoes on the beach, which is, annoying at best. So I'm very well versed in the coddling of criminal behavior and selfish people and children who don't want to grow up, people who don't want to confront reality. They don't want to deal with their own trauma, with their own pain. They don't want to do anything. They just want to sit back and get high and believe that taxpayers should pay them. I would even run into people on the streets and talk with them and tell them, like, if you're going to make a big mess everywhere you try to go and sleep. One guy was ranting that we need to be able to have a place to sleep. And I said, but if you're constantly making big messes and you don't, like, there's a trash can right here, why don't you just throw your stuff away or pack your trash? That would help the taxpayers who are paying for all of these programs for homeless people. They might be a little more understanding. But when you're leaving a big mess and you're leaving your gnarly paraphernalia everywhere and beer bottle, it's like we're not going to support that. And we don't want you sleeping around here if you're going to do that. So at least if you're going to be homeless, drug addict, at least pack your trash. Right? Like, I was trying to be somewhat reasonable, but I just got to the point, it's like, forget it. And it wasn't until I was wanting to move out of California, where I traveled to, this was probably almost 10 years ago, I was traveling, touring farms and working on farms, and I came to a goat farm in Arizona where I met this lady, this young gal. She was so level-headed and intelligent, and it was such an honor to meet her. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to get out of California. I can't take it anymore. I just feel like there's this coddling, and the taxpayers are getting wrung out to take care of people who are clearly being childish and irresponsible. And she says, oh, you have compassion fatigue. And this was before a lot of the fatigue statements were coming out. I thought, yes, that's exactly what is going on. I am so burned out with having compassion because I am required to have it, what I believe now, and I know for certain that I'm accurate because the state that California is in now, is that we are required by law to have compassion on the wrong people. Compassion is for victims of crimes and or loss or sickness, or when it means to suffer with. And so when you have compassion on someone, you're feeling, you feel, you know how to feel for them, like, wow, that must be hard. And you're sick, you went through divorce, you're widowed, you're childless, you lost a child. We have compassion. But now we're required to have compassion on criminals. On men, when you're walking down the street, they are yelling at you, raging at you with this anarchy spirit. You're scared as a woman to walk down the street. And they're mumbling who knows what. The explicit language of just F this and F that and F everybody. And they're clearly either they're demonized or they're crazy in their addiction and they've gone mad. And I mean, my understanding of a true homeless person is they're actively looking for help. I have been in situations where I needed housing and I did not park on the street and make a bunch of trash and get high and drunk and then blame the government and whomever else. I was actively looking for a place to be. That's why I learned how to do work trade, because more or less you will always have a place, because a lot of property owners need people to help them on their property. But not if you're going to show up drunk and drugs and drama. They don't do that. And so here I am, Mama Jess. Good morning. We are talking about the rites of passage, and I want to discuss the difference between coddling and caring, because if there is one thing that I do believe will destroy our country more than anything, I will say it again, it's having compassion on the wrong people, where you're enabling them to stay in irresponsible, childish, and even criminal behavior, and calling it compassion. So there's a real bad definition going around. You're not to have compassion on criminals. You are to provide justice for the victims and mercy if they are penitent and grieved by what they've done. That might allow for their punishment to be minimized. But if you've committed a crime, you have to deal with the consequence. Consequence means with a sequence, with like a step. You're moving in the direction of something with this movement. So if you do this thing, the consequence will be this. This is the next step. But now we have this massive government programming and indoctrination where you have this big compassionate hand that interferes, like, no, you're not going to have to suffer the consequences of your actions. We know you suffered. We know that you've been in poverty. We know life has been hard for you. I can tell you, every person I know right now who has money was in poverty before they worked for 50 years to have the money that they have. They were in what we might call the white trash mobile home parks. Or they were living where they had hardly any money. They are scratching to pay rent. They can hardly find milk money for their children. But they worked really hard and they sacrificed a lot. So when we say all these rich people, like, actually a lot of these rich people were impoverished. And they worked really hard and they made the right decisions and they were smart with their money and they weren't wasteful, hanging out getting high all day, wasting their time, money, energy on drugs and alcohol and drama. And I'm sure screwing around with people and having illegitimate kids. Okay, so if we're going to remove the consequences, we're going to have a real problem. So I'm here to say, with rites of passage, a big part of growing up is that you need to learn how to help other people grow up as well. And the first and foremost part of this is that you will be hated. You will be told that you're unloving, you're judgmental, you're mean. How many times have you told your mom or dad, I hate you, you're mean, I hate you? What, because they told you that you needed to clean your room for the 10th time? And if you don't, you're going to have severe consequences of losing your video game screen time rights or something? Right, so a big part of growing up is that you will have to be hated and misunderstood and misjudged by an immature child mind that wants their way. They don't want to do the hard work of growing up, so they want to put it on you to continually coddle their ever endless childish life. So an example, we have a neighbor, and this has been my life, where whenever someone is in massive crisis, they go, oh, well, Jess can take care of it. Jess has got it. Let her, you know, she's got time. She's responsible, and so she's got time. Everyone thinks because I've made decisions to do work trade and figure out how I can stay home as much as possible and stay out of the work environment where people are ridiculous and raunchy music and pecking order cruelty and avoiding their responsibility and putting it on responsible people. I've made decisions to get out of that environment. So when you're home, though, a lot of people think, oh, you got plenty of time, you're just doing nothing all day. It's like, no, as a matter of fact, I'm like trying to build like a national movement, or I'm trying to create music that will change people's lives, or I'm trying to write books to communicate my experience with grief to help this addicted country learn how to feel their feelings. It's like, no, but apparently they think they can just knock on the door like, oh, Jess, you can help. So a situation that happened about a year ago, there are many widows in this rural area. A lot of them moved up from the Bay Area to live in a quiet place. Their husbands have since passed away, and they don't have any farming, homestead, no skills whatsoever. They mostly watch TV all day, and they have their little dogs that they forget to feed, and then they're texting you or calling, can you please feed my animal or whatever, or can you please go buy me dog food. But what I've witnessed, and this is not the first experience I've had with this, that's why I call a lot of older people old babies, because they are children, and they have their addiction. That's the point in which their brains stop developing, and they want everyone to take care of them in their drunkenness, in their selfishness, in their being mean and controlling. It's complete self-willed child having a tantrum all the time. And they'll be nice only so much as it helps manipulate you into thinking that they really care about you, right? But the situation was, this woman, she is a white wine boxed white wine alcoholic, and she's drinking her days away. She's got her little puppies, she's got her cats, and a situation arose which was horrible, but she had, in her drunkenness, had fallen out of her bed and could not get up and was on the floor for 3 days. And people began to wonder, like, is she okay? I think she had a caregiver that finally inquired with her. She might only have seen her caregiver once a week, so the caregiver's like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? No response, of course. So we had to go and break into the house, get in, and find that she had been on the floor for 3 days. So the firefighters are called, the paramedics are called, and immediately there's this like, Jess, you could take care of them. She needs a caregiver. This would be great. You're needing a little job, and you could make some money, and you could hang. And at that moment, when things like this happen, I feel that every cell of my body begins to drain out all of the life force, all of the joy, the peace, the purpose in life, the meaning, the hope, drains out of me. And I'm left as this cavity of sick, like, no, I don't want to take care of someone like this. This is probably my Santa Cruz training. Like, I don't want to have compassion on people like this. She's been a drunk her whole life. She's been controlling her whole life. I don't want to waste my time and energy on a woman who has no interest in lifting a finger to take on the responsibilities of her body, soul, or spirit, or her home, or anything. Her relationships. She's alone because she's burned everybody. Nobody could be around her being so ornery. So, of course, I have to do the most grand, difficult rites of passage that you will ever go through in this country of coddling, this country of demented compassion. It's a perversion of compassion, which is all about codependent enabling. A lot of people who don't have a life like to care for people. It makes them feel important. Care for immature, irresponsible people. And I refuse to do it. So when you come upon this point in your life, you're going to have to make the most massive, terrifying decision that you are not going to participate in the coddling of America. You are going to stand up to a widow who has fallen out of her bed, who is drunk all the time, who is mean and ornery all the time. But because she's this poor, sad widow that fell out of her bed and has to go to the hospital, people are going to say, but she needs help. She needs a caregiver. You would be really good at it. Look, her dogs and her cats, they didn't eat for days, and they were, pooping all over the front yard and or in the house. And, you could be there. Like, do I want to spend my time cleaning up poop on someone's floor while they were drinking and being irresponsible? Like, I refuse to do that. I refuse. And when you do that, you will be called the most selfish person in the history of the world. That you need to take your time and energy and invest it into these people, because poor them, they had a hard childhood. Everything was really difficult for them. You really, you're privileged. Look, you're well. Yeah, because I eat super well. Because I'm highly disciplined. Because I don't drink and get drunk. I don't do drugs. I actively do everything I can in my disciplined life, in my adult, mature, responsible life, to take care of myself so I am capable to take care of my responsibilities and be available to help people who are in real need. So it is absolutely crucial that you learn to discern the difference between coddling someone and destroying them in your so-called care, or caring for them, knowing that sometimes people are legitimately sick, they need legitimate help, they need help moving, they got injured, they need help. There are all kinds of charitable need that we as human beings are obligated, morally obligated by God, to care for the widowed and the orphaned. But what happens when that widow is an absolute sluggard, drunkard, lazy, mean woman? Now we are obligated to continually help her while she's showing no signs of any maturity. And I'm at a point where I don't want to call this person a widow. She's not worthy of the title of a widow. A widow is when someone has lost a husband or a widower, and they are not drinking themselves into oblivion, getting high, burying themselves in the television. They are actively going about how to help themselves and seeking God and trying to be well. And if they have needs, it's legitimate. They're doing all they can to not be a crazy drunk. They've worked on all their relationships to be healthy, to be kind. So I had to say no. No, even though I am like 100 yards away from your house. No, I am not available. And even though I don't have a world of I've got so many chores and responsibilities and projects I'm doing. But if it was an absolute true need, I would sacrifice. I would say, okay, I'll be available for you. I'll do that. But not this time. So you need to know, in order to not participate in the most destructive force in this country right now, which is this goofy notion of compassion, which I believe is derived from that same kind of Marxist, socialist, communist spirit, the same kind of ancient demons that have been coming around, trying to enable people to keep them immature, childish, lazy, irresponsible, procrastinating, and mooching off of other people who are hardworking. I know what it is to work with a real legitimate person in need. I worked with my stepbrother. He was autistic, is autistic. I worked with him for 7 years. And unfortunately, oftentimes, in this labor of love, the other caregivers would show up late, or I got to leave early, or can you cover for me? They're being responsible and they're putting it back on me. And I got to the point where I was burned out. So a lot of responsible people are getting burned out and not wanting to do this coddling anymore because they know it's a dead end. They know that you're creating an individual that will be an old baby. They will be mooching off you for the rest of your life. And it will drain you to no end. And you can't invest your time in helping the people who have real needs. And when generally, unless it's a chronic disability, when you're helping someone with a legitimate need, they usually get better and move on, and it's not a lifelong thing. But what we are seeing now all over the world is this enormous coddling of people who are looking for handouts. Sadly, their government is so corrupt, they're having to flee. But have they done anything to try to help their country change? Are they protesting these things? Maybe they're not able to. Maybe they'll be killed. Because most likely and always, it's a godless country that cares nothing for their people. And they're stealing even aid that comes into their land. So coddling versus caring, you absolutely need to know when the situation is going to drain the life out of you. And you are not going to be helping someone, especially an addict. Remember, that self-will run amok, that addict personality, they will manipulate and lie and use you endlessly to keep drinking. And they will pull all these cards like, but I fell out of my bed. Yeah, because you were drunk. You're a drunk. And now you're using the paramedic and firefighters, and they're showing up all the time because you keep falling out of your bed. This is the same thing I know with a man. He was like 300-400 pounds, and he was constantly falling because he's a glutton and he can't stop eating. So if we don't call these vices what they are, rather than having compassion on this massive man that eats too much, we need to say, we're not going to help you anymore. You need to suffer the consequences of your actions, and hopefully it will be brutal and painful enough that you'll stop behaving like a spoiled child. And you, ma'am, are not a widow. You're a drunk, and you're a mean drunk. And you need to suffer the consequences of that. So if we are going to be in this country that labels everything and everyone, label it what it really is. And I have been around people who are orphaned. They're fatherless. And we're supposed to care for the fatherless. But this young man was a psychopathic thief. So before recognizing he's fatherless and having compassion on that, we need to backpedal and go, wait a second. He's got this societal deviance. He's a nuisance. We need to first label the first layer of problems that have to be dealt with. And then hopefully eventually you can deal with the deeper issues going on in their life. Hopefully they will be healed of that child trauma. But just because someone has a child trauma doesn't dismiss the fact that they're guilty of committing crimes, whether it's social, political crimes within the public, or if it's moral crimes, spiritual crimes before a holy God. So you will have to say no, and you will have to be accused of being selfish. That will be one of the harder rites of passage, and I don't know many people who have made it through, considering how much coddling is happening in this country. So by reason of use, we exercise our discernment, and that is rooted in wisdom. And we need God's help. We need counsel from wise older people. We need someone to help weigh the situation, to understand what is really happening here. Is this a widow who needs help, or is this a drunk, ornery old lady that has been using people and abusing people her whole life, and now she's suffering the consequences of that? Because you don't want to interfere with the consequences that are our only hope of changing a person's bad character. Do not interfere with the consequence. But also be careful that you're not one of those harsh, militant people when someone has a real need, that you're abandoning them and saying, well, you're going to have to learn this lesson. You're just going to have to suffer. Well, the person is actually dying now. They had legitimate need. So if we don't begin to really understand the difference here, we are going to be destroying people with legitimate need for compassion and charity, and we are going to be coddling the criminals. And I know many of these criminals had a hard life. Many of us have had a hard life. People have been sexually abused. They have been raped by their parents. They have been beat. They have been subject to poverty, but they did not go the route of being a criminal. So if that is your excuse, When you get to the day of judgment and you say, well, I became a criminal because my dad beat me, it's not going to go over well. Right? So you need to take responsibility for your life. Yes, they did that and they're guilty, but it is not a license for you to go on and be a monster, a social monster. All right, coddling versus caring, rites of passage. I hope that is helpful for you, because this is truly one of the most important rites of passage we need to grow up and to fight against the coddling. And I do see that we have political parties, extreme political parties, that are masters of coddling criminals in the name of, well, they had a hard life and we need to help them, and they're poor, and so we need to help them. Be careful that your help is not creating massive old babies that will turn and tear you to pieces. The whole goal is that every single one of us here needs to grow up and take personal responsibility for our lives. All right, thank you for your time, and I'll talk with you soon. Bye-bye.